Hi everyone, I'm Heather Wen, a retired nurse practitioner and the founder and practitioner at Arizona Healing Alternatives. On this channel you'll find several videos, what I like to call aha moments, where we'll be discussing issues that impact your health. So whether you decide to use Western medicine, alternative medicine, or even a mix of both, I'm passionate about you knowing what your options are. For today's aha moment, we're going to be talking about, I know most people don't want to talk about, but yeast. And I'm not just talking about yeast infections for women. I'm talking about yeast that lives in our guts internally, that can be on our skin and other areas. It can affect men and women equally. And so I want to talk about that, and we're going to talk about what it is, what the causes are of it oftentimes, and then what are the treatment options. So stay tuned. So what are we talking about when we're talking about yeast? Are we talking about brewer's yeast? Are we talking about baker's yeast? The yeasts are used for various different purposes, from cooking to all sorts of things. It's in food, it's everywhere. But what I'm talking about is actually when yeast kind of takes over in a body. Well, how does that happen? Well, there's something called our gut flora, which are our intestines, our small intestine and our large intestine, mostly small intestine, but basically there are different amounts of, and people call it the microbiome, things like that, where we have different bacteria. We have different bacteria, yeast, and things that all live in harmony. So within the body, where yeast is proposed to have come from is oftentimes antibiotic use, because we have this perfect balance between E. coli, that's one that causes a lot of urinary tract infections and other infections. There's E. coli, there's Candida albicans, and there's acidophilus. There's all these different bacteria, good and bad and whatever. Well, oftentimes one cause of an imbalance of that is using antibiotics. Now, antibiotics are life-saving, don't get me wrong, but there are antibiotics that sometimes what they do is they kill the good and the bad. So when you have something like yeast sitting there, then we kill these guys. Then yeast, when it's in its normal balance, because it's a normal inhabitant of our body, folks, it's not like you want to go without it, but then it overgrows, okay? So it overgrows and it takes over because, like, hey, the other guys moved out of the neighborhood, so I'm here and I'm gonna go have some fun. Right. So yeast itself, what it actually becomes is it's usually a single-celled organism, and then when it mutates, it becomes multi-celled and it becomes a mold, actually. So what's interesting is we know with yeast and molds, they're used for, there's mold on bread, blue cheese, there's all sorts of different positive uses for mold and different breads and sourdough breads and different things like that. So there are some good aspects of it. But when it overgrows, then we come into these sorts of yeast infections and problems, right? So the yeast can be, like, for a woman, a vaginal yeast infection. For a guy, it can be jock itch. It can be athlete's foot, okay? All those areas where yeast can break out. It can break out under the skin, under skin folds, things like that. It can break out, and what it usually is red. Okay, it's usually red, and it's very irritating. It irritates and it's itchy for many, many people. And that's what happens when it takes over. Now, the other thing that can happen with that is you can actually get a systemic yeast infection. What does that mean? And people talk about leaky gut. That's kind of a different issue, but it's not the gut holding in the bacteria where it needs to be. When you get that imbalance, you can get systemic yeast things, and it can be things like when you eat, you're bloating, you're swelling, all sorts of different things. In fact, what's really interesting is they have talked about like even eczemas or psoriasis may have a yeast component to it. All right, so what do we do about all this stuff? Well, if it's just a very simple type of yeast infection, there are Western medicines. I used to treat women for yeast infections all the time. There are different creams, there are different things that you can use. There are internal pills. There's one that's called diflucan, which kills it all over. And in fact, there is a spore, valley fever spore, okay, which diflucan helps because it's in the category of that fungal infection. So there's different types of fungal infections, and that would be a whole nother video. But for this, there's different ways of going about it, okay? There are yeast-free diets, because what do we know about yeast? One of the things that Viktor Frankl said was 99.9% of medical conditions are related to two factors. One, sugar metabolism. Two, water, drinking enough water. So what's interesting is there are sugar control diets, there are things like that, there are yeast-free diets that you can go on that actually work on killing that and then restoring the balance of the other bacteria that live there. There are other things that you can do. So those diets, that's fine. There's sugar control diet, which I used to put people on and can put people on with that. And then it can control that and try to kill it. There are different things like the Western medicines that can kill it, like the diflucans and other things. What I love about naturopaths is that they go in and they also arrange a specific diet plan and a specific way of eating to actually kill it. Now, of course, yeast lives in our body anyway. So from my perspective, what I do in Total Body Modification, the applied kinesiology that I use, we treat it as an allergy. So what I do is, especially if it goes systemic and causes other problems and swelling, what I do is it's a 7-step series. And unlike most of the allergy work, which you can look at the other allergy videos and the demonstration that I did on that, that's usually routine that you can do 3 at a time. Yeast is a different animal. And in Victor's world, he believed that yeast mutates into other things. And there's a 7-step section of what it mutates into. He believes it mutates into, like, not that you have a sexually transmitted disease, but it can mutate into different types of chlamydia, into EBV, which a lot of people are talking about, Epstein-Barr virus, which is the virus that goes in, that causes mono, into cytomegaloBacteria, all these different things, until he feels that yeast takes the immune system down to the point where it can lead to some serious conditions, such as multiple sclerosis, such as cancer, such as HIV, all sorts of different things like that. Now that's his theory. What he did was he made vials so that instead of just holding it on the center of the chest like you see in the video, those vials go all the way down the center, and we find out what area is that living in and how to correct the organ. And then it goes down the arms and even down the legs. And it's like a 7-week-long step series to do one at a time because it's so big. Those vials are so incredibly big because it's systemic if it's that sort of problem. And with that, and treating that, then I tell people, if you want to go and find somebody that actually kills it, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the body in harmony with it, because yeast is everywhere. So it gets the body to say, oh yeah, okay, I have that, but I'm not going to react and have the rashes and have the infections and have all those things. So from this medicine, what I love about it is it gets the body in harmony with it to bring it back in balance. There are other nutritionals that you can do. People talk about taking acidophilus, which are probiotics now, or prebiotics, all those things. I'm not an expert in that stuff, but those things can help. But what you have to be careful of is also, I tell people to be monitored with that, because what you have to be careful of is you can always have too much of a good thing. I remember as a gynecology nurse practitioner, a women's healthcare nurse practitioner, that we would see an overgrowth sometimes for women. We would see an overgrowth of the good stuff, and that could cause itching. You think, well, it's the good guys. Why would that cause itching? It can. And so everything in the body, the take home is everything in the body is in a specific balance. And that is what's so very important about this. It has to be in balance with other things. So however you decide to put it in balance, whether you decide to see somebody to actually Western medicine to actually kill the yeast itself, whether you see a naturopath and you get some other supplements to try to restore that microbiome, is what people are calling it these days, those in the intestines and what they're doing, it can help fight this in the long run. So, and even if you decide to use what I do, which is harmonizing it, that's another way of doing it as well. So hopefully this has helped and given you a little idea of different options to do with yeast. So please feel free to leave comments in the comment section. And also if you have any questions in that section too, please let me know. Always find out what your options are so that you can live in harmony with yeast and all the other little microbiome that you have. Have a good day.